After years of observation, right, I've come to the conclusion that sports are destroying our young black brothers, making them delusional, depressed, and hopeless. I've seen this trend where you have a lot of teenagers who are not even on the team, but they have this idea that they're going to college or going to go to the league. I see a lot of young men who are in their 25 to 30 years old still saying they're trying to get to the league. During this period now, they're not developing any skills to provide for themselves or society. Also, which you know about, parents living through their child, which contributes to it, and which I know you're going to talk on, the amount of attention given to athletes. What are your views about the relationship with sports in the black community?
I think that sports are overemphasized in the black community. And I think this ties into a legacy coming from slavery, where black men and black women our worth was determined on our physical attributes. And to a large extent, it's still the same way now. If you are an athlete, the way in which your worth is determined is identical to the way in which the worth of an enslaved African was determined. It was your output, your strength, how fast you could work. You look at the NFL combine, you look at the NBA workouts, it's nothing but a slave plantation. The only difference is you're being paid money. But the power differential between the slave and the slave master, and the power differential between the NBA player and the NBA owner, or the NFL player and the NFL owner, is the exact same as the power differential between the slave and his master. The only difference is they are given money that allows them to live a comfortable life outside of the plantation. But beyond that, it is the same thing as slavery. They don't have no voice. They're afraid. They're timid. Their behavior is strictly controlled. It is slavery. And the only reason why we don't see professional sports as slavery is because the amount of money that they make. And that's because we equate money with power. Money is not power. Money buys you access. Power gives you the ability to control outcomes. These athletes do not control outcomes, and most of them don't even control their own lives. I also think that we have to look at the fact that the black community overvalues sports and athletics, and we undervalue academic excellence. The child who gets straight A's and B's, the child who's mentally gifted, the child who aced his SATs, the child who's in the top 1% smartest children, best reading scores, math scores, science scores, language scores, they will never get the attention of the basketball standout, even if he's an academic failure. They will never get the attention of a football standout, even if he's an academic failure. He could be failing 3 classes and he's still going to get a big trophy at the end of the year for helping them go to the playoffs or win the playoffs. He may have no future after he leaves that school that year, but because he won the championship, got us a trophy, we're going to put him on a pedestal. But the kid who's likely to come up with a cure for cancer, sitting right in his classroom, is not even going to be mentioned. And so we have to look at how we as a people have allowed public school culture and black community culture to overvalue athletes and entertainers and undervalue our children who are academically excellent. That's on us. And then you have to look at the fact that our children don't have access to role models in those careers where they live. The dentist don't live in our neighborhood. The surgeon doesn't live in our neighborhood. The engineer doesn't live in our neighborhood. You barely find black teachers and black principals who live in a predominantly black neighborhood. Most of your black bourgeoisie, your middle class, is moving into a white life. So how are black children going to have access to role models that might make them think twice about wanting to be an athlete or entertainer when they're not around? They're going to gravitate to what they see. And what do they see in their neighborhood? Aspiring rappers and aspiring entertainers and athletes. And what do they see on the television? Rappers who made it and athletes who made it. So whether they're outside on the street or in the house watching YouTube, all they see is black men who overvalue athletics and entertainment, even though these are low potential careers. And what I mean by that is the likelihood of you becoming rich or wealthy or being good enough in athletics or entertainment to live comfortably off it is very slim. You have a greater chance of being struck by lightning than you do of becoming a professional athlete or entertainer. But no one's telling our children this. And this is one of the reasons why I believe we need to bring the industrial building trade programs back into our communities. Because I do believe that even if he wants to be a rapper, even if he wants to be a basketball player, if he doesn't make it, and he's a licensed plumber, a licensed electrician, a licensed welder, a licensed auto mechanic, a licensed HVAC contractor, he can still live a decent life for himself. But right now, black boys in inner city schools are only given 3 options: go into the military, become an athlete or an entertainer, or go to jail.
In defense of people who leave the neighborhood, not single people, but people with children, they want to put their children in a different environment. That's why it's kind of hard to stay, especially if you have, because I have conversations with my peers about this. It's a hard decision to make. Do I want my child to grow up in the environment I grew up in, or do I want my child to grow up in another environment? There are pros and cons to both, because if they don't grow up in my environment, they're missing out on stuff, but at the same time, they're not being exposed to stuff. Then when you put them in a different environment, suburban, white environment, they're missing out on stuff, but at the same, they're exposed to stuff, but they're not exposed to other stuff. So it's like a two-edged sword in a sense, you know?
Here's what I would say. If I had to make the decision between, and I'm gonna start with school and go to community, but if I had to make the decision between putting my child in a white private school versus a black inner city school, I would probably go with the black inner city school. The academics are going to suffer, but I can supplement that myself at home. But if I put my child in a white suburban school and they destroy my child's self-esteem, he or she may never recover. And I've actually seen this happen as a school psychologist, where the self-esteem and the self-belief and the concept of our children were destroyed in a year's time at a white private school, and sometimes the children never recover. So for me, I think it is safer from a psychological perspective for them to remain in the hood versus go into the suburbs. Now, in terms of safety of my family, it is a tough decision. And I would not criticize a black person, parents who took their children out of the ghetto and put them in a white suburb, if they were actively trying to remake that ghetto into the community that it needs to be. My issue is not so much about where you raise your children as it is about what is your commitment to creating the thriving black communities that we need. To move out and turn your back on the black community, that's an insult. But if you say I'm moving out because I cannot afford for my daughter to be snatched up and I can't afford for my son to be murdered senselessly, but I'm still in the community playing my role for the children, and I'm doing whatever I can to fight against gentrification and homelessness and crime and high school dropout, I can respect that, because although your family does not sleep in the hood, you are still active in the hood. I can respect that. But a lot of what I see are black families who abandon the black community totally once they get out into the white suburb. And we got to keep in mind, you can be abducted in the suburbs just like you can be abducted in the ghetto. You can be killed in the suburb just like you can be killed in the ghetto. So a black man and woman are safe nowhere in America. But again, I can understand that move to the suburbs for the babies. I can understand it. But you yourself should never abandon the community.
And I respect that, right? There's a third thing I want to touch on, but I have to jump back. When you spoke about the self-esteem in the suburbs, I have seen personally, I have witnessed this, where the self-esteem has been destroyed being in the inner city when you're an intellectual person. So it's a tricky situation. So it's like you go there, yes, there may be a situation due to the racial dynamic at the school that can really destroy your self-esteem. But being in another environment where, as we just spoke about, academic excellence is not praised, but actually criticized and ridiculed, you also can have your self-esteem destroyed in that environment also.
I can see that. I was one of those straight A kids. You know, I can remember jokes being made about me because of my tendency to excel in the classroom. I wasn't the brightest, but I was among the top of the students. But the impact that had on me over the long run was minuscule compared to what could have happened to me when I lived in a white neighborhood. I can remember one time when we did live in a white neighborhood, and I remember I had white playmates, and I still remember I was in second grade, and the white man came across the street and knocked on my door and told my father that he didn't want to see me near his children anymore. I still remember to this day. So let me compare the insults of my peers in the ghetto in the black North Philadelphia school, okay? And let me compare that to one time hearing this white man tell my father he didn't want to see me around his children anymore. You know what affected me more as a child? It was what that white man said to my father one time that weighed more heavily on me than all the insults of my peers put together. At the end of the day, I'm riding with the ghetto against the suburb.
We didn't talk about parents. There's a very toxic culture, sports culture across the board, and obviously we're included, where the parents themselves have a one-track mind for their child. They're using the child for this meal ticket. There are two things. The parent is trying to relive their childhood through the child. Then the other aspect is the parent is trying to get a meal ticket from the child.
I've seen that. I see it all the time. It's one of the biggest problems I think we have in the black community. I remember one time getting a phone call from a father. He said, Dr. Umar, I need you to talk to my son. I said, why? He said he's a gifted athlete. He's about 6'5" tall. He could play basketball or football. He could dominate. Whenever he gets on that field, he can dominate, but he has no interest in it. He wants to be a barber. I still remember the conversation. I said, what's wrong with him being a barber? That man could end up owning 50 barbershops, training black kids all over the country, keeping them out of jail, teaching them a livable skill, donating money to community institutions. What's wrong with him being a barber? The problem was the father wanted to relive his academic dreams through his son. And it's something that I refer to as athletic abuse. Athletic abuse, when a father or mother, but it's usually the father, because they didn't achieve what they wanted to achieve in the world of athletics, they now put that burden on their son, who may not even be interested in being an athlete, but because they want to please their dad, they don't want to disappoint their father. They get into football, get into basketball, get into baseball, get into track, get into boxing, simply because they want to please their father. And it's a very dangerous road, because they can end up losing themselves and losing their father if they don't succeed or decide that they want to walk away at a certain point. It's a very big problem in the black community.
Many athletes only play the sport for attention. There's another aspect too. Athletics was the only vehicle of approval and attention from their own parents or guardian.
It can be.
So back to what you were saying.
And definitely a vehicle. Athletics is a vehicle of attention and approval from peers, particularly if you're not popular or if you're not in the in crowd. You know, so if I go back to when I was in school, I was just straight academic. That was just me. You know, so I really didn't care. You know, I had my friends and everything, but I wasn't like part of the in crowd, if you would. I was part of the academic nerdy crowd. You understand? And I could see where some children may not have been self-assured as much as I was, where let me get into this to see if I can earn some more stripes with the popular people in the school. And I do agree with you that a lot of children do end up going into sports, especially if they're good at it, to try to attract a following, to try to be initiated or accepted by those who get the respect in the community and within the school. But I think it's more has to do with trying to please their father and build that relationship. Because for a lot of boys, unfortunately, they may have a father who will only come see them when they're playing a game. So this is my road to getting my father more involved in my life. If he can't brag about me to his friends, he may not see me. So, you know, I think there's a lot of different ways in which that athletic abuse operates in that father-son relationship. And sometimes mothers feel powerless about intervening because they do recognize that through athletics, you can learn a lot of lifelong traits and skills, the teamwork, the team building, understanding how to live with loss and being humble in victory. Athletics can teach a lot. It's very therapeutic if the coach has a mindset for developing the children. But when a coach has a mindset that is all about wins and losses, that coach can also end up being guilty of athletic abuse. I've seen coaches destroy the self-esteem of children as much as I've seen fathers do it. And when the father is the coach, if I could be in charge, fathers could not coach their own sons unless they had a psychological evaluation. It was deemed healthy enough to do it, because there's nothing more tyrannical than to be an athlete with a narcissistic father as your coach who you got to go home with. Nothing is more tyrannical.
And it's nonstop for him.